For 7 years she feed him, a quiet man weathered by life, forgotten by the world. He never asked for much, just a warm roll, a kind smile, and a place to feel human again. Even on her wedding day, dressed in white, she set aside a plate for him. But what she didn't know was that he wasn't just a homeless stranger. He was a retired Marine, a veteran, a man of honor with a past cloaked in silence. And when he finally returned, he didn't come alone. He brought his entire unit, standing tall, saluting her in front of the whole town. Because kindness never goes unpaid. It always finds its way back. Most brides spend the final hour before their wedding caught up in a whirlwind, fixing curls, fussing with lace, or rehearsing vows under their breath. But Alina Monroe stood still, wrapped in white satin and soft silence, as sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Gabriel's Church. Her eyes weren't on the mirror. They were locked on a moment from 7 years ago that kept tugging at her like a memory that refused to stay buried. Back then, she'd been just another young bakery worker trying to keep her head down and bills paid. Every morning, she arrived at 5 a.m. sharp to prep the ovens, glaze pastries, and sweep the sidewalk clean before sunrise. It was during one of those early hours that she first saw him, an older man sitting quietly on the bench near the edge of the bakery's awning. He wasn't panhandling. He wasn't begging. He was simply there with the kind of stillness that made you pause. His jacket was worn, but his boots were laced precisely, and his posture, straight-backed even while seated, betrayed a lifetime of discipline. Most days, Alina left a paper bag on the bench beside him. 2 warm rolls, a cup of coffee, and a folded napkin. Sometimes she added a short note, "Today is worth staying for. You matter. Be safe out there." He never said much, just nodded with eyes that held both sorrow and strength. She never pried. Something about the way he carried himself told her he was used to silence, and even more used to being ignored. Now, standing in her bridal room all these years later, Alina smoothed the fabric of her dress and glanced through the narrow gap in the door. Guests had started to arrive. Laughter and perfume drifted in. Cameras flashed. But something else, someone, caught her eye. There, just past the entryway near the back pews, stood a figure that seemed out of place to everyone, except her. He was older now. His silver hair combed neatly. His dark blazer hung carefully on his frame, pressed despite its age. His shoes were shined, though clearly worn at the edges. There was a deep dignity in the way he stood, upright, composed, hands folded lightly in front of him. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But when the light from the stained glass caught his eyes, Alina gasped. She knew those eyes. The voice of her wedding planner broke through her trance. "Alina, we have just 10 minutes. Everyone's in place. Photographers, the quartet, your uncle with the readings. Are you ready?" But Alina didn't answer. Not right away. Because through the open door, she could hear the whispers. "Who invited him? Is that some random old man? He doesn't look like he belongs here." Someone else muttered just loudly enough to wound. "Is he trying to get handouts at a wedding now?" Alina's chest tightened. Her perfectly done makeup, her carefully timed ceremony, all of it became irrelevant in an instant. Without a second thought, she gathered her gown in both hands, silk rippling around her ankles as she rushed out of the bridal suite. Her veil slipped off her shoulder. Guests turned in confusion. The string quartet paused mid-note. Her wedding planner's voice followed in a frantic hush, but Alina didn't stop. The foyer was full of people in suits and sequins. But she only saw him. She stepped straight into the center of the room and wrapped her arms around the elderly man without hesitation. For a moment, the crowd vanished. There was only warmth, quiet, and the unmistakable scent of old cologne and fresh linen. "I still remember your eyes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The first time. 2018, you were sitting under the bakery awning." The man, once a stranger, now unforgettable, smiled gently. The kind of smile that softened every weathered line on his face. His voice when he spoke was deeper than she remembered, but clearer too. "I remember every morning," he said. "You treated me like a human being when I had nearly forgotten I was one." Alina nodded, tears threatening her mascara. She reached for his arm instinctively, looping it through hers, grounding herself. Together they turned to enter the chapel. Just then her wedding planner approached, confusion written across her face. "Alina, the ceremony is about to start. Who is this gentleman?" Before Alina could answer, the sound of sharp tires rolling to a halt outside the chapel turned every head. The heavy oak doors of St. Gabriel's opened wide with perfect timing, almost militaristic precision. 12 men stepped inside. Uniforms immaculate. Faces solemn. Gloves white as snow. Gasps filled the chapel as they marched in formation. Not a step out of line. Not a sound except their measured boots on marble. At the front was a tall Marine captain, the nameplate reading Hawthorne. He stepped forward with ceremonial grace and came to attention directly before Alina. Then, in front of every guest and every camera, he saluted. "Ma'am," he said with firm, resonant clarity, "on behalf of Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, we are here today to honor a man who saved lives, and the woman who saved his." Whispers vanished. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the tile. Captain Hawthorne turned, gesturing toward the man at Alina's side. "This is Sergeant Elias Grant. In Fallujah, 2004, he carried 6 wounded Marines through enemy fire after taking shrapnel to his own shoulder and thigh. He was awarded the Silver Star for valor, though he never claimed it. After losing his wife and daughter in a car accident in 2016, he disappeared from public life, refusing benefits, declining all recognition." Mouths fell open. A few guests sat down slowly, their expressions pale. "But during those years," the captain continued, "he found something else. Or rather, someone found him." He looked to Alina. "You never knew his name. Never asked for his story. But every morning you left food, warmth, and dignity. And that," he paused, voice thickening, "saved him in more ways than one." Alina looked at Sergeant Elias Grant, whose eyes brimmed but did not spill. "I didn't need to know who you were," she said softly. "I just knew you mattered." Silence hung in the church like a held breath. Sergeant Elias Grant stood tall beside Alina, though the weight of memory pressed heavily in his posture. His hands, calloused and marked by time, rested calmly at his sides as Captain Hawthorne turned to face the pews. Behind him, the remaining Marines broke formation and stood in solemn attention along the aisle, uniforms pristine, boots aligned like a wall of honor. Nobody in the audience dared speak. Not the uncle who'd once dismissed Alina's compassion as naive idealism. Not the distant cousin who had snickered about her bringing a stray into such a pristine ceremony. Not even the bridesmaids who, moments earlier, were worried about how her makeup looked under the lights. In that sacred hush, Alina stepped forward with Elias still at her side. She faced the guests, blinking away the tears that clung stubbornly to her lashes. "This man," she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside, "sat quietly outside my bakery for nearly a year. Most people walked past him. Some mocked him. A few even asked me to call the police to move him along. But I didn't see a problem. I saw a person." She turned toward Elias again, smiling. "I didn't know he was a Marine. I didn't know he had fought in a war. I didn't know he'd carried 6 wounded men through enemy fire or that he refused to talk about it even when people tried to pry. All I knew was that he showed up each morning, rain or snow, with the same quiet dignity and strength. And I wanted him to know he mattered." Elias swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. For a man who had faced war, death, and unspeakable loss, the emotion in that moment was harder to bear than bullets. Alina continued. "I didn't invite him here today as a guest. I asked him to walk me down the aisle." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but she ignored them. "I lost my father when I was 19. Elias never tried to replace him. But over time, in those silent mornings, he became a constant, one of the kindest, most honorable men I've ever known." She looked at him again, voice softening. "You may not have worn your medals, Sergeant Grant. But you earned my respect every single day." Elias glanced down at her, his throat too tight for words. But his eyes, oh those eyes, spoke volumes. Grief. Gratitude. A strange joy, long forgotten and rediscovered. Then without a word he offered her his arm. Alina took it with quiet pride. The string quartet began to play again, this time not the traditional bridal march, but a rendition of Amazing Grace, arranged in a slow, reverent tone. The soft weeping of guests filled the space as Elias and Alina began their walk down the aisle, side by side. It wasn't just a bridal procession now. It was a moment of redemption. A silent rewriting of what society often overlooks. The worth of a life lived in quiet courage, the beauty of unseen kindness, and the power of being remembered. As they reached the front, Alina's groom Marcus stood waiting. A former Navy lieutenant himself, Marcus stepped forward with reverence. He saluted Elias sharply, his jaw set with emotion, and then embraced him like a brother in arms. "Welcome, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I'm honored you're here." Elias gave a nod and replied, "You've chosen a good one, son." The chapel chuckled gently at that, the tension broken by warmth. The ceremony began, but the air had shifted. No one fidgeted with phones. No one whispered side comments. Every heart in the room seemed tuned to a different frequency now, one of respect, reflection, and something more sacred than tradition. After the vows were exchanged and the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alina and Marcus turned back down the aisle as husband and wife. But Elias didn't disappear back into the background. He was invited to the reception. And not just invited, seated at the family table. The hall was elegantly decorated, with strings of lights overhead and soft jazz echoing across the room. Yet, despite the splendor, the real focus was the man in the navy blue blazer with medals finally pinned to his chest, quietly placed there by Marcus before they left the church. "Silver Star," Marcus had said, fastening the ribbon gently. "You earned it. You wear it today." During the toasts, Alina's maid of honor gave a heartfelt tribute. But the room grew even more hushed when Marcus stood and tapped his glass. "I'd like to say something," he began, glancing down the table at Elias. "This world moves fast. We scroll, we click, we judge within seconds. We walk past people who've lived entire lifetimes without ever asking what those lifetimes looked like." He paused. "I almost didn't get to meet Elias. I almost didn't know what he meant to Alina, or to the lives he saved. But I'm standing here today because she chose to look deeper. She saw past the wear and the silence. She offered dignity where most people offer pity, or worse, nothing at all." He turned fully toward Elias and raised his glass. "To Sergeant Grant, who taught us all what real valor looks like, on the battlefield and in the quiet corners of life." The hall erupted in applause. Not polite claps. Real, thunderous applause that made the chandeliers tremble. Some guests stood. Others cried. Elias looked down, humbled beyond words. Later that night, as the music softened and guests began to slip away, Alina sat beside him in the garden behind the venue, her white gown trailing across the grass. The stars blinked above like gentle watchers. "You okay?" she asked. Elias exhaled slowly, looking up. "I've spent years trying to forget certain things. And even more years thinking I'd already been forgotten." He turned to her, eyes moist. "But today reminded me that kindness leaves a mark deeper than pain ever could." Alina rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "And you've left a mark on me too. On all of us." They sat in silence. No cameras. No crowds. Just a bride and the man who reminded her, long before anyone else ever did, that even when life feels unseen, it is never truly invisible. A month after the wedding, the scent of cinnamon rolls still lingered in the early morning air around Alina's bakery, but something had shifted. The front patio, once just a place for quick coffee and quiet glances, had become something more. The regulars had noticed it first. The small, unspoken changes. A new table had appeared. Just one. Wooden, round, sturdy. Tucked beneath the awning, away from the street but not hidden. A sign hung gently over it, carved by hand. "The quiet table, for those who've served." There were no cameras. No announcements. No press. Only a few words shared between Alina and Marcus as they spent their wedding gift money not on a honeymoon abroad, but on setting something sacred in motion. Each morning, while most of the city still slept, they would set out warm plates. Scrambled eggs. Toast. Black coffee. Simple food. But made with intention, served with respect. No questions asked. It began with just one visitor, an older man in a faded army jacket who nodded silently when Alina gestured to the table. Then came a second. A woman in her 60s with trembling hands and eyes that scanned every corner. Then a third, a man who hadn't spoken in weeks, but who returned the next day simply to sit. They never asked for names. They never demanded stories. Only one thing was required at the quiet table: presence. Word traveled, not through flyers or social media, but in the language veterans speak fluently: honor, trust, discretion. Within weeks, Alina was serving 15 to 20 people a day. One morning, as Marcus unloaded supplies from the back of his truck, he found something wedged into the door, a postcard. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Every breakfast is a salute. E.g. Sergeant Elias Grant hadn't returned to the bakery after the wedding. But his presence hadn't vanished. Every month, like clockwork, a new postcard would arrive. Postmarked from different corners of the country: Flagstaff, Bozeman, Savannah, Spokane. Each one carried the same words. Every breakfast is a salute. It was Captain Hawthorne who finally filled in the gaps. He stopped by one morning in civilian clothes, nodding in respect to Alina before sitting down quietly. "He's doing better," he said, sipping the strong coffee she handed him. "For the first time in decades, Elias is using his VA benefits. He's attending trauma counseling. Got housing. Even reached out to a few of the guys from his old unit." Alina blinked back tears. She'd never asked for updates. She never wanted to make Elias feel watched or obligated. But hearing that he was healing, it felt like watching a seed bloom in soil she never expected to see again. On the first anniversary of the wedding, Alina and Marcus arrived early, intending to quietly place flowers at the quiet table and honor the memory of what had begun. Instead, they found 12 men and women already waiting, all wearing civilian clothes, standing in respectful silence. Each held a single flower. Red, white, or yellow. Captain Hawthorne stepped forward. "We've decided to rotate shifts volunteering here," he said. "We won't let this honor fade. No speeches. No ceremonies. Just quiet hands cleaning dishes. Boots pacing gently in the background. Veterans serving veterans." A new tradition was born. What began as a small act of compassion had become a refuge. A meal station for those who needed more than food. They needed acknowledgement. Dignity. A place where no one asked how they got there. Only, "How do you like your eggs?" Alina framed Elias's original note above the serving window. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Beneath it, she added her own message in carved wood. "Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing." 6 months later, a local news crew caught wind of the quiet table. They asked for an interview. Alina politely declined. "Talk to the veterans," she said. "It's not about me. It's about the people we overlook every day." On the tough mornings, when donations ran low or volunteers were late, Alina would pause, breathe deeply, and remember that day in the church. 12 Marines standing at attention because one woman offered one man a warm roll and eye contact. It was enough to carry her through. Marcus understood. As a firefighter, he'd long known that not all heroism came with sirens and flames. Sometimes, he told her one night while stacking chairs, being a hero is just showing up, day after day, with nothing but compassion in your hands. Alina leaned against him, tired but content. "When I married you," Marcus continued, smiling, "I didn't just get a wife. I got 12 Marines, and a growing family of veterans." Alina chuckled softly. "The best kind of family, the kind you choose, and the kind that chooses you back." That winter, a young man in tattered denim approached the bakery, hesitating at the edge of the sidewalk. His eyes were sunken, face weathered beyond his years. He looked at the sign, then the table, then turned to leave. Alina stepped out quietly. "No pressure," she said gently. "It's warm inside. And there's coffee." He paused, uncertain. "Are you with the VA?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I'm just someone who believes in second chances and warm eggs." He gave a faint smile. A rare thing. And then he sat down. Another story. Another soul. Another reminder that some debts require no money to repay, just the daily dignity of being seen. Alina never did find out every detail of Elias's story. She never asked for his service record or wanted to know the full weight he carried. What mattered was simple. She saw aging eyes, a stomach in need of food, and a person worthy of acknowledgement. That small act, one breakfast, one roll, one name remembered, preserved not just a life but a legacy. One that echoed across a city and stitched a forgotten community back together. Elias Grant had once believed he would die alone, unrecognized. Instead, his presence birthed something eternal. And somewhere out there, on a dusty road or a quiet bench by the sea, a Marine was still sending postcards. Still saluting with every bite. If you believe a small meal can save a great soul, type, "I will live with kindness." Because not every hero wears a medal. Some quietly eat breakfast under a stranger's awning. and the smallest gesture can salute the mightiest heart.